Hey there, investors. My name is Devin Moreno, and as many of you know, I own 9 properties and manage 11 more, but I also have a full-time job that makes me work 9 to 5. So there's a lot of different methods that I employ to make sure that I can handle not just the simple things, which I have in another video, automating your rental property, but also some of the more annoying, complex kind of disasters that can happen to a home. You really don't want those phone calls at 2 in the morning about your heat being out or the place being flooded and then not know what to do about it. And so today I want to give you some strategies and tips for probably the main 4, which is going to be your heat going out, your appliances breaking, lockouts with your tenant being locked out of the house essentially, and then flooding. So I'm going to go over all those. I think all the more major disasters, if there's a hurricane that hit and the house is underwater or the house burns down, then in most cases this is simply an insurance issue and your tenant just cancels the lease and that's pretty much it. So we're not going to be talking about major disasters. These are more like the minor annoyances that don't stop your unit from actually being rented, but yet you still need to deal with it extremely fast because all of these are going to be extremely annoying problems for your tenant and in some cases will cause excessive damage if you don't react quickly. So how is it that I have a full-time job, which I'll be quitting very soon, so watch out for a video on that in the future, so spoilers on that, while still managing all of these rental properties. So let's go ahead and get into it. My tips and strategies to deal with this and make sure everything can work as smoothly as possible. So the first one I want to go ahead and mention is appliances. Now, many of you may wonder why I'm even including this on the list. Dishwashers are not exactly emergencies, so you can take your time to fix those. Same with washers and dryers. But the main one that's actually going to throw you off is your fridge. Your fridge is holding all of the food that your tenants bought. And even though the tenants can buy more new food, a lot of your tenants spent $300+ more likely sometimes more, on all the food for them and their families. So when your fridge goes out, then you realistically have to replace that pretty fast, or at least do something about it. Now, in some cases, you don't have to do anything about it, and I'm gonna go into that, but realistically, you have probably at max 24 hours before all that food is gone, and in some cases, even less time. So the first thing you're gonna want to know is that fixing a fridge is often more expensive than replacing it. And this is actually going to be the case with most appliances. You're going to find that most appliance repair people will charge you like $200 to $400 to fix most issues. In that case, you can get a new rental grade fridge delivered to your house and then the old one hauled out for exactly the same price. So that might be shocking for many of you. You might be thinking, wait a minute, fridges cost like $800+, but that's because you're most likely shopping at Home Depot or some other major outlet retailer that has, appliances for brand new. As landlords, we don't pay homeowner pricing. I talk about that a lot on my channel. All right, so if this is surprising to you, then watch more videos on this. We pay everything cheaper, but essentially what you want is rental grade refrigerators or washer dryers. Keep in mind this can be stainless steel. This does not mean white, does not mean black. The color really doesn't matter. It's just rental grade, and essentially you can get these delivered very quickly with a lot of vendors that are going to be in your area. So the first step is to have a list of these vendors already approved by you. Maybe you've already worked with them or maybe you visited them, and so you can give one of these approved vendors to your tenant, and then they can go ahead and handle this issue themselves without really bothering you. As long as you approved a price ceiling and a maximum, then there you go, your tenant can solve the problem, and then the more control and power you put in your tenant's hands, the better they're going to feel about the entire situation. Now, of course, another option is just to simply say that you're not responsible for the fridge or any other appliances. Actually, as crazy as it sounds, landlords actually aren't required to provide any appliances at all. You can actually include a section in your lease that says that you aren't going to fix any appliances, and if you want, they can have you remove it when they move in. Of course, this is going to kind of require storage, but even not, like, you can just get rid of it with an appliance repair specialist. They'll haul them out for $80, and there you go, you're done. Of course, you'll have to buy it again when the actual lease renews for the next tenant, but long story short, you can just put a clause in there that says you don't fix appliances, it's not your problem, and you take it or leave it as it comes with the unit. Now, if you are required to fix the appliances, maybe it's in your lease, then what I would recommend is keeping a list of all of the information about the appliance. Take a picture of not just the brands and models, but also the tags that often have all the serial number and information on them. Also, a picture of the general washer and dryer and the plugs that they plug into. So if it's an appliance, oftentimes you're not going to want to go to the property to inspect if it's a 30 amp outlet or a 20 amp outlet. Just take a picture of the plugs and such like that. As far as the refrigerator, once again, just take a picture of the entire refrigerator. Your appliance specialist will know then what size it is and what exactly you're dealing with as far as heights and limitations you have with it. Most of them are all 30-inch. I get it, but there are a lot of unique variables that your appliance repair specialist is going to want to know before they replace it with a new fridge. Also note that renter's insurance actually most of the time will cover personal belongings. Now, most things are not considered personal belongings, but however, a washer and dryer and a fridge actually are. So with these cases, you can actually leave the onus on your tenant to call renter's insurance as another available option to them along with the approved list of vendors. And then there you go. Now they can have more power in their own hands to deal with the situation.
Also, small side note, I'd recommend having one of these in the property because that's a situation that can be solved quickly and you don't want that getting any worse. So fire extinguisher in the property in all your units, highly recommended.
The next major one we're going to talk about is your heat going out. So this is the most frustrating one to deal with as the winter approaches and then suddenly your tenants turn on their heat and it's the middle of the night often because that's when they start turning them on because of course it always starts getting cold at nighttime in the fall or in the spring, sort like as the winter is closing out. Sometimes they'll break at the end of the months. But then, yeah, the heat's out and your tenants are saying it's cold and it's like near 9 o'clock. Well, the problem with trying to get this fixed is you're often going to have emergency services. And if you call companies like, big companies, Michael & Sons, whatever's regional in your area, then they're going to charge you a lot of money to get this issue fixed in a timely manner that evening. So what you want to try to do is stretch out the period of time that you need to resolve the issue to as maximum as possible. Often this maximum is about 2 days. All right, so don't think you have like a week. At that point, your tenant probably can just start withholding rent and such. You don't want to get to that point. But essentially, you need to stretch it out at least beyond that evening. And then also keep in mind that when your heater is breaking, often your furnace or heat pump or whatever it is that you have, generally it's during a time that many other neighbors around you are having their heat sources fail as well. Most people don't do due diligence before the winter actually arrives, which we're going to get into, and then all of them are breaking at once, and then all of the HVAC companies are all backed up with phone calls. You don't want to be in this situation where you can't get someone to come out quickly because, everyone's stuff is breaking. So one of the first things I would say to do is to have space heaters ready to go in the home. I know that sounds kind of strange, but honestly, for a low cost of $25 to $50, you can have maybe 1 or 2 space heaters, depending on the size of the home, to at least give them some comfort. Remember, if your tenants are at least comfortable and can at least go to bed, then you don't have as much to worry about. Remember, we're talking about the beginning of winter here. Your pipes haven't actually had a risk of freezing yet, so it's nothing like that. It's just the tenants don't necessarily want to freeze in their houses. So having space heaters ready and available as complimentary in the unit, and you can mark it on your lease that you did provide this, so they have to give it back, then there you go, no problem. They just go down, get the space heaters, and at least you then can postpone till the morning. Obviously, there's a lot of services on weekends that will force you to kind of postpone maybe longer, but hopefully you can get a service that will respond on weekends. That's another tough one. That's a little bit annoying. I would recommend smaller guys rather than the big companies for that kind of purpose, because the bigger ones will charge a lot more for this. Now, space heaters aside, there's not a whole heck of a lot else you can do except for just simply spend the money to call an emergency service. So let's talk about preventative maintenance in advance. Just make sure that your air filters are replaced in your furnaces, air filters replaced in your mini splits and all those type of units in advance. In a lot of my units, if I have mini splits and I'm up north of the kind of midway line of the US where it gets a lot colder, then I will will install auxiliary heat like wall heaters and such to complement those mini splits. So those mini splits oftentimes will die on you or stop working or fail.
For those of you who don't know, this is a mini split. So these things actually provide AC and heating. So and they're actually very easy to install in a lot of walls. They're pretty flexible in how they get around the house. So that's why a lot of people install them, but they do tend to break, and so at least around the summer, the winter time, as I've noticed. So that's hence the auxiliary heat.
So a nice little wall heater is a great add. Also, you can install these throughout the home if your apartment is cheaper, it's like smaller. Keep in mind, these things are like $250 a unit, so this will stack up costs on you pretty quickly. But this is just simply an option as an auxiliary heat option, but most specifically, just do your tune-ups and maintenance in the spring and fall, well before the winter actually hits or after it ends, because you're going to be dealing with AC problems in the summertime, which we're not going to get into in this video because fortunately AC is not considered a major thing that you have to supply as a landlord, so that's not an emergency. So we're not going to really talk about it in this video, but if I can say anything, at least have some space heaters ready and available in your home to go. Now, lockouts are another really annoying one. What I'd recommend here is having a lockbox at the property, all right? So a lockbox, and we're gonna get into another option where your tenant can get their own key. But if you have a lockbox at all your properties, then this is not only just a way to get your contractors in without you needing to go there and arrive and greet them. So now they can get into the house without an issue. This helps with all these emergency aspects, so absolutely keep a lockbox on the property. But also, it is useful to let your tenant get in the house. Now, this gets a little bit more complicated if, let's say, your tenant is in a duplex, triplex, or something like that, and the lockbox has keys to many different units, in which case we need to arm them with the ability to get the key themselves. So with that, I often recommend Key Hero from Home Depot. Key Hero is an app that allows you to digitalize all of your keys, and then they can just go to any Home Depot in the country, and you can send the key to the key machines in any Home Depot. And so Home Depot is open from 6 to 9 p.m. So, I mean, with those type of hours, there's a lot of time of the day that they have available for lockouts. Now, obviously, beyond that, you can give them the number to a locksmith or lockout service, in which case it's maybe one you approve or maybe one who even has a key to your house. There are programs available that they'll have digitalized versions of your key and they can come out there with one. And so there you go. You have no issue with that. Now, let's say you have a contractor or someone who's willing to go to the house to perform a lockout function. What you can do is make a master key. With a master key, you can actually set all the tumblers on your lock to not only respond to the tenant's key, but a single master key that your contractor or yourself would have in your possession. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we do talk about this in some of our videos, and we'll be going into how to make a master key for your locks. But with all these methods, that'll make it where you don't need to necessarily wake up in the middle of the night and go drive to your rental property and then charge them some $35 lockout fee for the inconvenience. Instead, you can get them back in the property, no problem. Text them the lockbox code, get them to a Home Depot, or have your locksmith, get them back in.
Here's a quick tip. If you have a smoke detector that is constantly chirping, then one easy way to stop your tenants from even complaining about that is just to install the 10-year lithium-ion battery ones. Therefore, you never have to worry about ever these things chirping all night long, and then your tenant's giving you complaints in the middle of the night.
So the last big one we're going to be talking about is flooding. Now, flooding is a tricky subject because we're not talking about where your house has 4 feet of water, okay? At that point, everything's screwed, and your leases are probably going to get canceled anyway, so you're going to have a lot more problems than what I'm defining here. At that point, it's an insurance issue. You're probably looking at getting the tenant out of the house, and they're just going to, call rentals insurance in order to get their stuff and their belongings taken care of. But the type of flooding I want to talk about today is the stuff that doesn't force you into that situation. We're talking about 18 inches of water or less. More often, we're talking about a few inches of water. So oftentimes, this will create a major emergency problem because, well, the mold will develop if you don't handle this within 24 hours and get this place dried up. Actually, 48 hours probably is what you have max before mold starts developing. And at that point, now your house is dangerous to live in as mold spores can kill you. And then mold is actually even harder to get out of the house than the water is. So you do have an extremely limited window of time. You don't want to wait on this, but at least here's some steps we can do to maybe arm the tenant with some ability to fix this problem themselves while you get a good night's sleep and handle this problem in the morning, hopefully. So one of the things I usually have on hand is box fans and the shop vacs. So box fans and shop vacs, you can't obviously supply these in every house like these space heaters. They're a lot more expensive. Well, not the box fans, but more the shop vacs to actually suck up all the water, but you should at least have one available. So that way, if a contractor is not available to respond immediately, you can get up there in the next morning and get this water up. As far as the box fans, you should bring that with you so that way you can circulate the air, try to turn on as many fans and such as possible in the flooded area. Otherwise, you're gonna be dealing with mold that will grow over time. The more you circulate the air, the harder it is for mold to actually grow. Another thing I like to keep at a lot of my rental units, especially the ones with basements, is dehumidifiers. I just included in my renovation costs that a dehumidifier will be put in every single property. If you have a sump pump, then these are really easy to work with because then you keep them on all the time. Most tenants don't mind leaving them running, and then they'll just take from a garden hose going from the dehumidifier to the sump pump, and then boom, they'll just run constantly. Well, if you already have one in every single property, these things will cost you like, I don't know, $150. And then essentially, they'll have an option to get the humidity out of the air so that way mold does not develop. This is something that usually I put up a little higher. I generally try to keep them off the ground at least 18 inches. So that way, in the event of a flood, then they're not damaged. But also, more importantly, the dehumidifiers need gravity in order to really operate the actual function of putting the water back in the sump pump for it to get it out of there. And so being up higher just assists with that. Another thing you should do is let your tenant know in advance in the rental property where all the shutoff valves are, assuming they have access to them. Most things like sinks and bathtubs and a lot of water lines and even the main house itself has a shutoff valve. In fact, I would just mark it, like put a sign somewhere, a small sign with a yellow arrow or something noticeable where they can see, all right, this is where the shutoff valve is. Even if they remove the sign, at least they knew before they removed it, and therefore they'll probably remember it when the actual time comes, and they can cut the flooding off to the source. Now, after you actually remove all of the water and everything, then it comes to the response aspect. This is where a lot of people don't realize that most insurance doesn't actually cover flooding, even though it's the most common type of damage that happens to a rental property. There we go. The insurance companies win again, right? Like they never seem to put that in there. So just keep in mind that you will actually have to ask specifically for flood insurance. Also, rental insurance does not cover flood damage. So once again, the renters are probably screwed with their belongings and they may ask you to pay for some things, and I'll have to leave you up to that situation on what you want to deal with that. But just keep that in mind that you will have to specifically ask for flood insurance in order to deal with this. Also, as far as you dealing with all the actual property itself, what you're probably going to have to do is cut the drywall, at least up to the level of flooding, probably 4 feet up at some cases if it's really bad flooding, but otherwise just up to this certain point. Get rid of all carpet and padding because that's going to be a mold breeding ground. You're essentially just going to have to replace all that if it gets super wet. And, if it gets too high, like let's say 6 inches high, then you're probably going to be dealing with cabinets getting wet, and then you're going to have to lift those out. So it can become a little bit of a mess to get things out. But remember, you don't want mold developing. That is a much worse situation. Well, if you like videos like this, please make sure to like and subscribe. We're going to be talking about a lot of other automation tips in order to make sure that you do not have to get out of bed just to take care of an issue. So hopefully all that was helpful. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I'll talk to you all very soon.